Welcome back, my friends, to Marvel Snap. On today's tier list, we're covering the 2 costs. We have some of the absolute strongest cards in the entire game. Yes, I'm looking at you, Collector and Angela. We also have a set of cards that really give the identity to the main archetype decks. This is going to be a very exciting list. In terms of organization, today we're going to be adding cards to the list one pool at a time and take a little bit of a break at the end of each set of cards to be able to review how they came out, and then we'll go through pool 1, 2, and 3. At the very end, we actually have a set of cards that have been leaked. Their full effects and stats have been revealed, but they have not yet been released. We're going to speculatively place them up on the list, talk about where they may fall within the meta, and then have our final grand reveal of the completed tier list. We have a lot to cover, so let's get started. Number 1, Medusa. On reveal, if this is at the middle location, +2 power. This is one of your very starter cards. I think it's actually guaranteed that you get cosmetic upgrades on her first. We're going to put her into C tier. She has an excellent effect, and for your very first couple of decks, you're likely going to be running her as a mainstay to that center location, but she just gets outclassed as you find other cards later on. Next up is Sentinel, one of the very first cards that you get to upgrade out of your starter pack. On reveal, add another Sentinel to your hand. This card is absolutely incredible. We're throwing him up into the A tier. In the very beginning of the game, he helps you round out your energy curve, making sure that you have a 2-drop to be able to play. Later on, we hit excellent synergies with cards like Devil Dinosaur and Collector, which are incredibly powerful. I love playing Sentinel. Shocker is next, but let me tell you what is not going to be a shock is chucking this card down into the D tier. No effect, and then a 2-3 stat line is absolutely forgettable. I do have to say that there is one deck that is trying to run all the cards without effects and then uses Patriot, Onslaught, and Mystique to be able to be the engine cards to give them buffs across all of them. You run Mr. Sinister, you also run Brood to be able to spam out Squirrel Girl, as many of these cards with no effects as possible, and then buff all of these little bodies. And that deck, I don't even know if that deck runs Shocker, honestly, but it is not really breaking into the meta, though it does exist. It can get wins, so if you're interested in something that will just how to floor your opponents if they haven't seen it before, go ahead and give it a try. Next up is Star-Lord, and oh my goodness, look at this card art. This isn't even doing it justice. We have to pull this one up in the game client. Look at this. The Starscape dancing behind him and the colors just pop. This takes the cake for the best card art in the entire game for me. Let me know down in the comments if you guys have a alternate card that you think has better art. But with looks like these, we're throwing them up into the S tier, baby. I mean, come on. These lists are about more than just the raw power of the cards. You can enjoy other aspects to the game as well. If we were to rank him based on his actual power, being able to trigger +3 if you land him on the same location as the opponent played on that same turn. This is the exact same effect that all of the Guardian archetype cards have. I don't think it's very good. He would be in C tier for the raw stats, but you know, you gotta show some love to your favorites. As we move away from the starter cards and into the designated pool 1 cards, Angela is starting us off hot. When you play a card here, +2 power. This girl is incredibly effective. She's working her way into almost every single meta deck on ladder right now. We're throwing her up into the A tier, just incredibly reliable. And she puts out so much power. She even has ways to be able to go above and beyond the 2/7 stat line that you would normally get from just playing 3 cards to her location. A lot of people like running Nightcrawler to be able to get an extra buff out of her, but then there's even more convoluted ways to be able to recall her to hand with all of her buffs present and then play her again to buff her yet again. Absolutely amazing. Armor is next. Ongoing cards at this location cannot be destroyed. Armor had their time in the sun when the self-destruction deck archetype was absolutely running the table. Now that we have had the balance changes that brought that back into line, the self-destruction deck will actually run armor itself still to be able to potentially protect priority targets. And if Killmonger really makes more of a splash, it's interesting as the meta evolves how much people want to counter specific archetypes or not. Armor may come back up, but right now I'm not seeing it very much, and I don't see the self-destruction archetype or cards that your opponent are playing like Gauntlet or Killmonger, really attacking their opponent being prevalent enough to warrant running armor. Now for Cable. On reveal, put the bottom card of your opponent's deck into your hand. I think this card is incredible, getting that extra card draw from outside of your deck. It gives you information about your opponent's deck. It gives you that extra playing opportunity. When there is a very definitive meta deck that everybody is running, Cable is excellent in the mirror match, because then you're able to pull out of that opponent's deck. You're able to see if you potentially break up a key combo of theirs that gives you extra information about whether or not you should snap, and you have good odds of pulling what will be an effective card for your own deck in that specifically mirror match. But Cable also feeds into the Collector, which is one of the strongest cards right now, so we're putting him into the B tier because the meta has opened up and there's a lot of potential for different archetypes being run right now. So if you're trying to force him into every deck, you could get garbage. Specifically in collector decks, he has very strong synergy. Now for the oh so familiar face of Carnage. On reveal, destroy your other cards here. +2 power for each destroyed card. This guy, alongside his brother Nova, was the absolute bane of the first season of Marvel Snap. Nova got cut in half. Carnage came out unchanged, completely unscathed. So he is still an excellent engine piece for the self-destruction archetype. Now, rather than waiting to hold him and Nova for the very final turn to be able to get as much of a burst of a buff as possible, people more likely want to play Carnage early on to be able to get some tempo, have him gobble up some small bodies, get a couple buffs, pull Angel out of the deck, and just have a high tempo play for them. Rack up a couple kills to be able to play Death as a finisher. That's kind of the archetype that the self-destruction deck is molding itself into. The deck is not making too much of a splash in the meta right now, so we're throwing Carnage into the B tier. Very good in that specific deck, but really unplayable in anything else. Now we have Colossus, and he has an interesting distinction of being technically outside of the Pool 1 cards, but also not a starter. He's one of the earlier cards that you get, so we're including him in this early pool right here. He also recently got buffed as of the last balance change. Ongoing, can't be destroyed, moved, or have its power reduced. The or have its power reduced is the brand new part, making him, it really ties his theme together of being the unshakable rock that you can throw down on a location and know exactly what you're getting. The thing is, what you're getting is 3 strength, and that's not very exciting. I've seen him be able to push through locations that naturally want to debuff cards, and also get a couple plays in self-destruction decks where they want to be able to have a play that will survive, say, a Deathstroke or a Carnage coming in, but I don't see him being too exciting, and I feel like there's almost in every situation a better slot to, a better 2 cost to be able to plug and play. Now we have Domino. You always draw this card on turn 2 and not before. Very similar to Colossus here. You just get outclassed with a 3 strength by most other 2-drops. Being able to have the reliable play early in the game. Yes, it gives you tempo for some locations that will lock up early, or you will get incentivized to play cards early in the game too, but right now the meta is really, you potentially even hold your turn 1 and 2 plays to be able to play Nakia and then buff your entire hand. You want your 2-drops to be able to combo into some larger power swings later on with other cards, and Domino taking up a spot in your deck as that turn 2 play with only 3 power just really gets outclassed by cards that you're going to find later on. We have a very niche card next in Forge. On reveal, give the next card you play +2 power. That means that the overall power swing is just 3 strength, which is very weak for a 2-drop. But if you are putting that additional power onto a card that is able to make use and effectively duplicate the buffs, then you get a lot of value out of it. We're looking at multiple man. Forge is a staple for the movement deck. Also, the Human Torch, Nebula, and Deathpool are other cards that come to mind. So he has the opportunity to be able to synergize with these cards and really get these engine cards jump started. But if you're not running one of those specific engine cards, then he doesn't have any use. So very niche, powerful when you're able to combo it right, but otherwise doesn't bring very much power to the table. Another card that got buffed as of the latest balance patch, Kraven. When you move a card here, this gets +2 power. He used to be only +1 power and was so weak that even the movement deck was not running him. Obviously, he has to be played within the movement deck. Now that he is gaining +2 power per card that moves to his location, he can actually become a fairly beefy boy. So he's looking a lot better now as of the changes. We're putting him into the B tier if Heimdall is throwing a number of cards into his location, or even if it is moving Kraven with a set of cards, he's going to be able to start racking up the buffs, and I've seen some fairly large Kravens. Now for Lady Sif. On reveal, discard the highest cost card from your hand. This is potentially the most flexible card out of the discard suite of synergies. Absolutely love Lady Sif, very powerful right now. We're chucking her up into the A tier. The obvious marriage that she has is to Apocalypse. When you're able to discard Apocalypse, he gets +4 strength. Lady Sif is hitting the board at 2/4, which is a good stat line, but she can also be used in some creative hybrid decks, things like the Knight Rider deck, where she's going to discard the Infinite for 20 strength, and then Knight Rider is going to bring him back for an enormous swing on the final turn of the game. It's disgusting how tight that combo is for how much power it is offering, and there will likely be even more creative uses of Lady Sif in the future. So we're leaving her up in the A tier, one of the most flexible and strongest cards out of that set of synergies. Now, Lizard. Ongoing, -3 power if your opponent has 4 cards here. So we have a negative ongoing effect here. If he's up against the swarm of enemies, the Lizard brain kicks in and he gets scared or something like that. At 2/4, his stat line is all right. We're putting her down in the C tier. It gets outclassed very quickly as you collect more advanced cards, and putting the onus on your opponent to be able to remove that power from you is just something that you don't want to do. Mr. Sinister is next. On reveal, add a Sinister clone to this location with the same power. We have the card art for the Sinister clone over here, and the key here is that it has the exact same power as Mr. Sinister. So if you're able to apply any buffs either to Mr. Sinister in hand or as the moment he's being played through Forge, then the Sinister clone is going to come out very large. The Sinister clone also it's considered to have no ability, so that there is a kind of a suite of buffs that are potentially available to him either with Patriot or Washington DC are two that come to mind. So he can be very good. He's also spamming out bodies to be able to absorb area of effect buffs from other card sources. We're throwing him up into the B tier. I've never seen him really break out and be exceptional, but he's just a highly efficient plug-and-play kind of card. Multiple Man is next. When this moves, add a copy to the old location. This card is the backbone of the Heimdall movement deck archetype. He is the one that has to be there for the deck to really sing. You have to be able to put buffs on him and then start moving him all around. When the combo comes together, he is as strong as any of the other deck archetypes. The only thing that's keeping him from breaking all the way up into the S tier is that there needs to be so many combo pieces around him to get him to work. I have to be able to put him up in the A tier, even though the movement deck is not crushing the meta right now, just on the right of how powerful this individual card is. The deck entirely lives and dies on his strength, and that's what's kind of holding the deck back, is that they don't have additional pieces to come alongside Multiple Man to be able to get them going. Now we have Strong Guy. Ongoing, if your hand is empty, +6 power, which will bring him up to a 9 strength overall. This is also an extremely flexible card out of the discard synergy of cards. Right now, with the meta very much favoring high tempo, play a lot of cheap cards, try and run out your hand, Strong Guy is finding his way into a number of different decks. These decks like to include 1 or 2 discard effects that they can then play at the very last turn to be able to ensure that their hand runs out to 0. And the buff on Strong Guy, making him a 2/9, is certainly worth putting that little bit of investment into. He becomes a nice package to be able to splash in because of how efficient he is. Now, Wolverine. When this is discarded or destroyed, play it at a random location. Guys, why is all the alternate art of Wolverine him with no clothes? Is this part of the comics? I don't understand. He lives at an interesting intersection of the self-destruction and self-discard archetypes, I don't think that he is powerful enough to justify being the nexus of a hybrid deck type, but it's interesting to think about. He happily fits into both of the archetypes. You're going to see a lot of play of him in both of those styles of decks. So we're going B tier just because his strength is not that high to really give him any breakout moments, but he's going to be a B tier card that you're going to see a lot of. Cloak is up next on reveal next turn. Both players can move cards to this location. The Cloak and Dagger synergy is certainly here with the movement deck archetype. Cloak is a very important engine card to be able to facilitate all of the movement cards, and especially Dagger. Dagger is going to be able to come up a little bit later. She's going to appear and then gain buffs per number of cards that your opponent has at the location that she moves to. This is very interesting because it allows some counterplay on the opponent's side to also reorganize their battle line. And with this effect being double-sided, I think that they buffed up the raw stats of Cloak to 2/4, which feels pretty good to be able to throw down. So overall, I like Cloak a lot. We're going to put him into the B tier. Swarm. When this is discarded from your hand, add 2 0-cost copies to your hand. Incredibly flexible, very powerful engine piece for the self-discard archetype. He plays very similar to Multiple Man in that you want to start putting buffs on him before you start cutting him up and multiplying him. His downside is that the only ways to be able to buff him, because he has to be buffed in hand, are coming from Okoye and Nakia. Those are two very popular and very powerful cards right now, but it's a little less consistent than, say, Multiple Man, who's also able to receive buffs while he is on the board. Swarm, very good for the self-discard archetype, terrible in any other archetype, so we're putting him into the B tier. We're going to continue our discussion of Swarm as we hit Morbius later on, and right now as we go on to the Collector. All hail the king! When a card enters your hand from anywhere except your deck, +2 power. This guy is absolutely amazing. It is not an ongoing effect. Enchantress cannot turn it off. There is very little counterplay that your opponent has to be able to stop him from reaching insane heights of power. We're throwing him up into the S tier. Absolutely amazing, and he fits into so many different good decks right now. There are decks that play Cable and Agent 13 and White Queen that all are going to be creating cards. Also Moon Girl, to be able to buff him up and try and maintain very large hand sizes to be flexible around what they play with. Also running Bishop to kind of synergize with trying to play a lot of these little cards. You have other cards that synergize with him quite well, and Falcon and Beast, who are going to be returning cards from the board to hand, which will be able to buff the Collector. And there's some other fun tricks that that kind of archetype is able to pull off. And then there's even ways that you can splash him into these hybrid decks with discard archetypes, because, as we were mentioning, Swarm, when Swarm is adding the 2 copies to your hand, this is also going to trigger the Collector. Apocalypse works the exact same way, so the Collector can very happily live in a space within that self-discard archetype. The Collector is quite interesting to me right now because while I see him as almost disgustingly powerful, the raw numbers that he's able to put up, synergizing with these other already strong cards, just blow out pretty much all of the other 2 costs. I don't know exactly how much I would want to see him nerfed, because to be really powerful, he needs to have a number of combo pieces around him that are very designated toward feeding him strength. They work together quite well. I think that potentially just bringing down his starting power to a negative number, either a -1 or a -2, so that he's not able to get quite as large or quite as out of hand, would certainly bring him back into line. But I could very easily see him go on unchanged through the next balance patch. And with how wide open the meta is becoming as people are collecting more and more of the pool 3 cards and being able to explore other synergies there, he may even get edged out of this top spot eventually. Bucky Barnes is up next. We're back to a self-destruction archetype card. When this is destroyed, create the Winter Soldier in its place. And we have the Winter Soldier card right here as a 2-cost, 6 strength, who is going to appear at the same location that Bucky was at. An incredibly powerful card. He synergizes very, very well with Carnage. Carnage is going to be able to eat Bucky and get even stronger, and then the Winter Soldier is going to be able to eat Bucky and get even stronger, and then the Winter Soldier is going to come in behind. He also works with a interesting The Destroyer deck that is out there, able to play Bucky, and then when Destroyer hits the board and wipes everything else, you're going to have the Winter Soldier standing strong in his place. So because of this little bit of flexibility of a couple different decks that I'm seeing Bucky get played to, also just incredibly high tempo play with these synergies of being a 2-cost, feeding into Carnage. Early game plays can put a lot of strength on the board. Love this card, A tier for Bucky. Now we're finally going to be able to close out our discussion on how good Swarm is by reaching Morbius. Ongoing +2 power for each card you discarded from your hand this game. Now I was sorely tempted to throw him up into S tier and say, because he's Morbin, but we already had Star-Lord up there as kind of a joke S tier, and Morbius is just good on his own right. He's able to be a powerful engine card for the self-discard archetype. He just has to have a number of cards synergizing with that style to be able to get up into a decent stat line. So we're putting him down into the B tier because he's not very flexible in terms of the decks that he gets played into. There are a couple nuances here with his effect that's going to be very important to cover. One, it looks like initially he plays identical to the Collector, just instead of with card generation, it's card discarding, but that's not true. He has the ongoing tag, which means on the one hand, Enchantress can turn him off. On the other hand, Onslaught could double him, so there's some interesting synergies there. Also, with the wording the way it is, and from testing the card, you get credit for any of the discards that happen from the game. He doesn't have to be on the board to see you discard to be able to gain the power. You can turn him onto the board on turn 6, and then you'll be able to gain the strength for all the discards that you have done throughout the entire game. If you like the idea of these 2 engine cards, the Collector and Morbius, both gaining strength through their unique effects throughout the entire game, there's an incredibly fun deck that you're able to run where you do the self-discard archetype, you include the Collector, you include Swarm and Apocalypse, and then you play Wong, who is going to double the on-reveal effects at his location. So you set up Wong, you throw down all of your discard effects at Wong's location all at once to be able to keep on cutting up Swarm and Apocalypse over and over and over again. And every time you do that, you're going to be getting plus strength on the Collector, plus strength on Morbius, and it ends up with this enormous endgame power swing that is absolutely insane. And because you have a number of engine cards scattered throughout that deck, it does fairly well. It's fairly consistent because even if you don't hit Wong, you still get a lot of power on the Collector and Morbius, etc. Or if you are missing one of the Collector or Morbius, it can come together. I enjoy that deck a lot. I probably talked about it too much for a tier list. Morbius going into the B tier. Now we have finished with all of the Pool 1 and Pool 2 cards. Moving into Pool 3, Baron Mordo ushers us in. On reveal, your opponent draws a card, increase its cost by 1. I think this is terrible. Why do you want your opponent to have more cards, even if they are more expensive? His stat line is pretty weak. I do not see a use for him. Let me know in the comments if there's some kind of synergy that I am just missing. Sure, he synergizes with Ronin, but nobody is playing Ronin either because it's putting so much power on your opponent to determine how strong those cards are. D tier for Baron Mordo. Beast is up next. On reveal, return your other cards at this location to your hand. They cost 1 less. Oh my goodness. This card is incredibly powerful. Every one of those cards that is returning to hand will buff the Collector. If they're 1-drops, they will be able to come back to the board for free. Cards are going to maintain the strength they were at when they were played, so you can bounce Angela and then be able to replay her at the strength she was at and then continue to buff her even higher, and then she's coming back as just a 1-cost. Beast is so good for the potential of you being able to repeat these on-reveal abilities, buff the Collector, continue to buff Angela. All of these synergies together make him an incredibly flexible card. Very interesting to be able to theory craft decks that'll be able to make good use of him. Beast is an A tier. Next, Black Widow. On reveal, add a Widow's Bite to your opponent's hand. And here we have the Widow's Bite kind of cut out. When this is in your hand, cards in your deck cannot be drawn. So you play Black Widow, your opponent gets a Widow's Bite, which is a 0/0 stat line. and they will not be able to draw a card normally from their deck. Then, as is almost always the case, they're simply going to play Widow's Bite for free on their next turn. They're going to have to decide where they want to sacrifice a board space to be able to contain it, and they'll be able to carry on as per usual. I don't think Black Widow is very good. Her stat line is so weak, and just holding your opponent out of a single card draw, I don't see being that pivotal. Maybe she'll come into play with a self-discard archetype that is using, say, Moon Knight. Misspoke there. If you're using Moon Knight to be able to force your opponent to discard, and then there's another card, Black Bolt, to also force your opponent to discard, and then Black Widow to prevent your opponent from drawing, they can have a very limited set of options to be able to play. I'm just not sure how powerful that level of control over your opponent is going to be, especially with Black Widow only hitting the board on your side for 1 strength. So we're going to have to see how she settles into the meta. Right now, I think that she's pretty weak. We're going to put her down into the C tier. Now completing the Cloak and Dagger conversation, we've got Dagger. When this moves to a location, +2 power for each card your opponent has there. She can get enormous very quickly if you're able to move her a couple times with this flat buff, especially with the meta favoring decks that are going to spam out a number of bodies, either with a number of low-cost bodies with the Kazoo archetype, or even a number of big bodies with the Jubilee archetype. Dagger can get a lot of buffs very quickly. Love this card. Excellent for the movement deck archetype. We're going to put her up into the A tier. Maybe I'm being too generous on the movement archetype. I feel like she's kind of on the edge here between A and D. Maybe I'm being too generous, as I was saying, on the movement archetype because I enjoy playing it so much myself. It's not really taking the meta by storm right now. Hopefully it does eventually, because I absolutely love the mind games that can be played there. Next, we've got Goose ongoing. Nobody can play 4, 5, or 6 cost cards at this location. If this looks familiar to you, it is the exact effect of, oh no, Crimson Cosmos. It's a location that has this effect. I don't see Goose being very good. It can very much limit specific decks, especially towards the end game when you've seen them fill up one location, potentially being locked out or have to play very cagey around another location depending on that location's effect. And then you can throw this down and say none of your big finishers at this empty location that it seemed like you were indicated that you wanted to play to. But that whole constructed hypothetical sounds pretty tenuous to me. We're putting Goose down into D tier. Maybe Goose would have had more viability in the previous balance patch, where Devil Dinosaur was able to slide under Goose at his 3 strength, but then Goose could cover it and protect it from being turned off by Enchantress. But that whole specific and very important set of counterplay is really gone now that Devil Dinosaur has been nerfed. So we're throwing Goose down into the D tier. Maybe a deck will arise that will be able to utilize it. Maybe there's some kind of form of powerful control. Effectively, if a deck comes around that favors using lots of high-cost cards, Goose will be better. But right now, the meta is the exact opposite, so Goose, to me, will never get played. Now we have Hazmat. On reveal, give all of their cards -1 power. So this is the opposite of Blue Marvel, coming in at a 2-cost, 1 strength. Very interesting to try and theorize what decks this will work out well in. You have to have a very large imbalance of how many cards on your side are being nerfed versus how many cards are on your opponent's side being nerfed to justify actually playing Hazmat. There are some very carefully crafted decks that might be able to use her, but it's just migraine inducing to try and find the combo where she's going to be successful. And even when she is successful, is her strength actually better than just playing, say, Angela, who's going to very reliably hit a 2-7 stat line? I don't think so. Now, spoilers for later on in the list, we're going to be touching on another card that is not yet released that is the perfect partner for Hazmat. So we'll pick up this conversation a little later, but right now, C tier for Hazmat. Now for the Marvel character that no one knew was going to be their favorite, Hellcow. It seems like the perfect mate for Devil Dinosaur, though they actually have this anti-synergy going on, man. Marvel has done some weird things, guys. On reveal, discard 2 cards from your hand, 2/6 stat line. this is very powerful for the self-discard archetype. It is aggressively amping up the number of discards, empowering Swarm, Apocalypse, Morbius, the Collector, etc, etc. He has a great stat line at 2/6. I've even seen decks wanting to splash this in for sets that are trying to use the strong guy synergy and get as much of the optimum stats out of him. So you hold Hellcow for the very end, play him down to make sure your hand size is going to go to 0 to be able to score strong guy. So even a little bit of flexibility here, though it does mean that you have to hold it absolutely until the final turn with that style of deck type. Hellcow coming into the B tier right now. I feel like the self-discard archetype as a whole has a lot of room to grow here with additional cards coming into the common pool, coming out of this pool 3 that's very slow to collect. So I could see the priority on these cards coming up once the full set is commonly being seen together and people are able to optimize that list. But as I've said, right now we're coming into B tier with the Hellcow. Looking at Mojo, ongoing if both players have 4 cards at this location, plus 6 power, which will bring him up to a 2/8 overall. Disgusting card art, disgusting abilities coming into the B tier. Because your opponent has the understanding that they can potentially stop this if you play it early, obviously you can orchestrate situations where you're playing him to a location that your opponent has already filled up and you know you're going to be able to get the full strength out of Mojo. When you do get that full strength, he's a fairly efficient energy play, but he does have that little inconsistency about both sides of the location having to be filled up, and he doesn't have that many synergies with other deck archetypes. He doesn't really fuel other powerful cards at the moment. With the ongoing tag, he has a couple connections, but overall just not too exciting, coming in at the B tier for Mojo. Now we have Mysterio. As you play this, play illusions to other locations, disguise this as an illusion until the game ends, and the illusions are just going to be a 0 strength version of Mysterio, and there'll be a little question mark at the end of his name. Mysterio is great. He is putting 3 bodies on the board, and the illusions maintain any buffs they receive, both in hand and on the board, and then you're getting 2/5, which frankly is a good stat line just to play on its own. So Mysterio coming up into the A tier, absolutely incredible for decks that want to propagate area of effect buffs, and this is going to be putting 3 bodies on the board at a 2 energy cost. Very good card. Now, Psylocke. On reveal, next turn, you get +1 energy. Psylocke, for me, is very hard to figure out where to place her because the value of energy is incredibly high, but you're paying 2 energy to get 1 back later, and you're only getting a 1 strength body on the board. I'm putting her down in the C tier for now. I understand that there are decks that are using her, that are meta decks. The Mr. Negative deck especially likes to be able to use her. Being able to shift your energy stockpile allows you to kind of jump the conventional energy curve, potentially play more enormous finisher cards if you find a set that have very powerful synergy, or if eventually a set comes along of, say, 2 6-drop cards that are both insanely good working together that normally could never be played, but with Psylocke, they can. Next up, Viper. On reveal, your opponent gains control of one of your other cards at this location. Very pivotal skill. I don't think that it is very effective right now. Obviously, she works incredibly well with the hood, able to push the -2 strength over to your opponent and get maximum efficiency out of the hood play, spawning the demon and then a big swing with Viper pushing that card across. Also, if the Green Goblin or Hobgoblin come to really dominate the meta, or say another card with a similar effect that flies over to your opponent's side with a negative effect, Viper's the perfect counterplay to that because she could push it right back over for an enormous swing, quite frankly. But right now, those cards are not staples of the meta enough to justify running Viper. So we're putting her down in the C tier. Now, Adam Warlock. At the end of each turn, if you are winning this location, draw a card. You are able to quite easily draw through your entire deck to make combos incredibly consistent. The thing is that combos are already very consistent here in Marvel Snap with a very small deck size and only a couple cards that you're not going to see in hand every single game. So I'm putting Warlock down at the C tier, especially because he's coming in with 0 strength, and your opponent with this low tempo play on your side can quite easily step in to be able to counter his draw effect. Now maybe there will come decks that have more convoluted combos that really have to draw into their entire deck to be able to make things pop, and those are going to try and play Adam Warlock. Also, if we get more cards in the archetype of the current new headliner Thor, who creates a free 0/0 Mjolnir, a weapon that gets added into your deck, and when you draw it and then play it, you're going to be able to buff Thor. If we get a suite of cards that do this card generation, that are free cards that if you can only draw them will give you a powerful effect, Adam Warlock, again, might be able to come stronger into the meta. Right now, though, putting him down into the C tier. Very similar to the Beast, we are now going to look at Falcon. On reveal, return your 1-cost cards to your hand. We're able to bounce all the 1 cost back. We're able to buff the collector for every single one that comes back into our hand, and then we're able to throw them back out on the board to repeat all of their effects. I've seen this deck do very well. It synergizes incredibly well, obviously, with the collector, but also with Bishop and Angela. It gives you this flexibility of playing to one location, potentially baiting your opponent into countering you, and then seeing that if you are completely outclassed there, you can pull your cards back, throw them in at a new location, kind of make a mid to late game pivot there. Honestly, I feel like I'm talking myself up to putting Falcon in A tier. He's right on the edge. Definitely, if you want a deck that is doing something completely different than anything else out there, try the Falcon Beast bounce deck. And this is the end of Pool 3. So these are all of the 2 costs that are currently released into the game. We have a fairly nice bell curve here of, you know, the standout Star-Lord and Collector and the S tier. A suite of either very powerful or very flexible cards in the A tier, your general set of all the B tier that are fit well within their own archetype, but potentially only a single archetype, and then the C and D tier cards that get outclassed as you expand your collection or have very unique effects that have not fully found their way into a powerful deck yet. Now for the cards that have been leaked. We have all the information around them, but they haven't been released yet. So we're going to do a little bit of speculation and see if there is an obvious place where they can fit in the meta, if there's some kind of new deck that might emerge around them, and what secrets lie in store for us in the future of Marvel Snap. Beginning with Daredevil. On turn 5, you get to see your opponent's plays before you make your own. I'm not quite sure how they are going to choose to implement this. This is turning the entire simultaneous play aspect of Marvel Snap completely on its head. I'm putting him in the B tier right now. It is certainly a powerful effect, but you have to be able to play Daredevil before turn 5 to get any use out of him. The potential deck that I see arising is actually bringing the Guardians of the Galaxy in force. If you can know where your opponent is playing, you can guarantee to score all the Guardians cards and generate a lot of bonus power out of that. I don't really see him fitting too well into any of the other archetypes, but of course I could be wrong. The benefit of the information that he is providing to you on this important late game turn might end up bringing him into prevalent play across all decks. We'll have to wait and see. Now we have Hitmonkey. On reveal, gain +3 power for each other card you played this turn. Ooh, this guy is interesting. Starting out at 0 strength, he has to be hitting a number of combos to be able to get up to a decent stat line. That is currently in vogue in the meta to play a lot of these low-cost cards, especially with the Sarah Miracle deck that is decreasing the cost of everything for the final play where you try and throw down as many cards as possible. In that situation, Hitmonkey could absolutely pop off, but because he has this limitation of having to be played in a large combo to be good, it makes him challenging to play around. We're putting him in the C tier right now. I really prefer my low-cost cards to have the flexibility of being able to be played earlier in the game for a little bit of tempo, and so that's why I'm holding him back, even though he may potentially seem like he has a spot in one of the current meta decks. Now we have Hazmat's best friend, Luke Cage, at 2-1, the exact same stat line as Hazmat. Ongoing, your cards can't have their power reduced. So, you play Luke Cage, you play Hazmat, and only the enemy is getting reduced. Now, we're going to need some clarification and a lot of testing as to exactly how Luke Cage's effect works. If his effect means that cards cannot have their power reduced below their base power, he's not going to be very good. If, however, it means that cards never decrease in value, then he has some really incredible synergies, say with Devil Dinosaur. If Devil Dinosaur is out on the board, Luke Cage is out on the board, and at any point in the game you hit the 7-card hand to give Devil Dino the full 14 strength power, and then you play your cards, but Devil Dinosaur is never going to decrease in strength, Luke Cage is going to be absolutely amazing. You can play him, Devil Dino, Ronin, Hazmat, bring in Cerebro, who is adding a buff to your strongest card. Normally, I don't think Cerebro is very good because as soon as you play a bigger card, the buff is only going to transfer to it. It's only adding, I believe, +2 to those cards. But if Luke Cage means that any buff is effectively permanent, and so the buff from Cerebro on a little card is going to be able to stay with it even once you play a larger card, then I could see a whole deck archetype emerging with Luke Cage. So very excited to see the testing once he is finally released and where that is going to take us. The card that may actually be the most excited to get out of the currently unreleased set that we have had leaked is Maria Hill. On reveal, add a random 1-cost card to your hand. This is because she plays immediately into what is currently my favorite deck, the Collector Quinjet deck. Giving us the extra 1 cost is going to fuel the Collector, and then having Quinjet out there means that it's basically going to be free. Any of these cards that are generating new cards to buff the Collector and give me more options of what I can play coming in at a 1 cost means that I can very reliably be able to get it onto the board, as opposed to, say, Agent 13 that could be creating anything out of the entire suite of cards, including ones that are 6 drops, 5 drops that I would never want to play or have the energy to be able to do so. So we're putting Maria Hill up into the B tier. She is not that groundbreaking in terms of the effect that she brings, but she is going to have an immediate home in a meta deck. Now for the final card on today's tier list, Silver Sable. You can only play this at a location where you have 6+ total power. So it is a restrictive ability here at 2/6. She certainly has a premium stat line, but oh man. That restriction is just so painful. It means that you have no ability to play her early. You can't lead her to a location. You're going to have to set it up to be able to add her in. I do not see Silver Sable being very useful. So unfortunately, we end on a bit of a dead-end note, putting Silver Sable down into the D tier. But this is the completed, definitive tier list for all of the 2 costs in the game and even the 2 costs that have not yet been released. I think some of the key takeaways are that the Collector, Angela, Strong Guy with Lady Sif or some other single discard effect are some of the most flexible and powerful things to try and take advantage of and incorporate into your decks right now. Also a takeaway is that maybe I'm valuing the movement card effects a little too highly, with both Multiple Man and Dagger making it up into the A tier, but the deck overall not making that much of a splash in the current meta. There's a suite of discard effects that are all at the B tier level, which I think is about right. That deck is very solid, though not, you know, head and shoulders above everything else at the moment. And looking at the currently unreleased cards, there's a number of exciting pieces that are here that we're going to be able to play with in the future. Let me know down in the comments how you guys would improve the tier list, and if there were any card synergies that are very important that I didn't think of, that I missed. I'm always very curious to see how people are crafting these decks together. The game is still very young, and there is a lot that we have to learn. Stay tuned for more Marvel Snap content to come. I'm still got more deck guides in the works, and we're going to have more tier lists going on to the 3 costs and 4 costs. Very excited for what is to come on those tier lists. Some really incredible cards out there. Until next time, thank you guys for watching and have a good one.